Hello, welcome to another episode of Word Wednesday. There are a lot of words like eventually, ultimately, consequently, and subsequently that we know and we've heard. In this video, let's look at how, where, and when to use them correctly. Let's begin. Eventually. Listen to the pronunciation here. Eventually. It's not eventually or eventually, it's eventually. This word can be used in two ways. Let's look at the first one. It can be used when something will happen at some point in future, but we don't know exactly when. Let me give you an example so you'll understand better. Eventually, a cure will be found for coronavirus. We know the cure will be found, we just don't know when. So we say eventually. Eventually, a cure will be found for coronavirus. The second usage of the word eventually is when something happened in the past but it took longer than expected. For example, he worked for several companies and eventually found his dream job as a teacher. That means he worked for several companies but he was still looking for his dream job. Then, when he started working as a teacher, he realized that was his dream job. It happened, but it took longer than expected to understand that teaching was his dream job. Ultimately, this can also be used in two ways, just like the previous word eventually. Let's look at the first one. It is used when you refer to the final event in a series. It can be used in the same context as finally. For example, we saw a lot of houses and ultimately decided to buy the one closest to office. Easy to understand, isn't it? Seeing a lot of houses was the series of events, and the final event was to decide to buy the one closest to office. So, we saw a lot of houses and ultimately decided to buy the one closest to office. It can also be used to represent the goal of a series of events. For example, we may have met all the deadlines, completed all the tasks, and followed all guidelines, but ultimately, the client needs to be happy with the product. Meeting the deadlines, completing the tasks, and following all the guidelines were the series of events, but the goal of these events is to make the client happy. So, we may have met all the deadlines, completed all the tasks, and followed all guidelines, but ultimately, the client needs to be happy with the product. Consequently. We use consequently when we talk about events that occur as a result of something that happened in the past. For example, we worked really hard for this order. Consequently, the client was happy. The hard work we put in was the event that happened in the past, and as a result, the client was happy. So we say, consequently, the client was happy. Let's look at another example. People did not travel much in 2020, as a result of which, or consequently, the tourism industry suffered. Subsequently. Subsequently is used when an event occurs after a series of events. The only obvious relationship between them is time and not necessarily a result of the past events. For example, Sachin Tendulkar was an excellent cricketer and subsequently became the captain of the Indian cricket team in 1996. He was an excellent cricketer, and after some time, he became the captain of the Indian team, not necessarily because he was an excellent cricketer. Let's look at another example. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton fought neck and neck in the US elections in 2016. Subsequently, Trump won. The difference between consequently and subsequently is that consequently is used when an event occurs as a result of something that happened in the past. Now, let's make it easier. Let's say there are two events, event A and event B. We use consequently when event B happens because event A happened. We use subsequently when event A happened and then event B happened, and the only relationship between the events is time. Great. I hope this video gave you some insights on how to use these words. Using these words in your speech or writing will make you sound more advanced and fluent. Now go out there and impress people. See you next week.